The hall was larger than a basketball court, filled with polished floors that reflected the light from the ceiling. On one side, rows of chairs were neatly placed for the guests, businessmen, reporters, and government officials. On the other side, a huge machine stood covered by a silver sheet. The air buzzed with whispers, the way air does before a storm. Everyone was waiting. At the center of the stage, Robert the billionaire stood proudly. He was tall, with gray at his temples and a sharp suit that cost more than some people's houses. His voice was calm, practiced from years of speeches. He smiled for the cameras as he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, today is the beginning of the future." The crowd clapped politely. They had heard words like this before. Still, Robert's name carried weight, and when he promised a miracle machine, people listened. Behind the stage, a small group of engineers worked quickly, their heads bent over control panels. Their voices were low, serious. They had been working all night, but the machine had given them nothing but silence. Wires had been checked, buttons pressed, codes tested. Still, it refused to start. Michael stood far from the crowd, holding a broom. His uniform was simple, his shoes old but clean. He had been sweeping the floor since early morning, making sure no dust spoiled the shine of the grand event. Nobody looked at him twice. To them, he was just part of the background. But Michael's eyes kept wandering back to the machine. He had been watching the engineers for days while he cleaned, moving carefully so he would not be noticed. He noticed things others ignored. The way a wire trembled when the machine was tested, the way one light blinked slower than the others. To him, it was like the machine was speaking in a quiet voice only he could hear. Now, as the silver sheet was pulled away, the crowd gasped at the sight. The machine was huge, covered in steel plates with tubes and screens along its sides. Reporters rushed to take pictures. Robert lifted his hand for silence. "This invention will change everything," Robert announced. "Energy without waste, power without limits. Years of work have led to this moment." The crowd clapped louder this time, and Robert nodded to his engineers. "Start it." The engineers pressed the buttons, flipped the switches. A deep hum filled the air, and for a moment the machine looked alive. But then silence. The hum died. The lights went dark. Gasps spread through the room. Some guests laughed nervously. Others whispered to each other. The reporters' cameras clicked, capturing the failure. Robert's smile faltered. He looked back at his engineers. Again, they tried again. The hum returned, weaker this time, and then stopped completely. One of the engineers wiped sweat from his forehead. "It's not responding, sir." The hall grew colder. The whispers turned sharper. Someone in the audience muttered, "Billions spent on this?" Another shook his head. What a waste. Robert's face turned red. He had promised the world something impossible, and now the world was watching him fail. At the edge of the room, Michael gripped his broom tighter. His heart pounded. He knew what was wrong. He had seen the loose wire earlier that morning when he passed near the machine. He had seen the misplaced switch. It was simple, so simple that the engineers, blinded by their complex knowledge, had missed it. Michael took a step forward. Then another. He walked past the rows of guests, their expensive shoes and shining watches, until he stood just a few feet from the stage. "Give me 1 minute," Michael said quietly. His voice was not loud, but in the silence of the hall everyone heard it. Robert turned slowly, disbelief in his eyes. "What did you say?" Michael cleared his throat. His hands shook, but his voice stayed steady. "Give me 1 minute." "I can fix that." Laughter burst from the audience. A reporter shouted, "The janitor wants to fix the billionaire's invention." The guests chuckled, shaking their heads. Some pointed at his broom. Robert raised his eyebrow. "You?" He almost smiled, but there was no joy in it. Only pride and irritation. "You think you can do what my team of experts cannot?" Michael did not look away. "Yes." The crowd laughed harder. A man in the front row whispered, "This will be good. Let him try. He'll embarrass himself." But Robert, for all his pride, was also curious. Something in Michael's eyes stopped him from dismissing him outright. It was not arrogance he saw there, it was certainty. Robert crossed his arms. 1 minute, he said coldly. "Go on. Show us." The hall grew silent again. Michael set his broom gently against the wall and walked to the machine. His steps were calm, but inside his chest his heart raced like drums. He had not touched a machine like this in years. His hands remembered, though, the way a musician's hands remember an old song. He crouched beside the wires. His fingers brushed over them, not rushing, not trembling. He spotted the loose wire he had seen before. He twisted it carefully, locking it into place. Then he moved to the switch, flipped it to the correct position, and pressed a button. The crowd leaned forward. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the machine roared. Lights flashed across its screens. The tubes glowed, and the deep hum returned, stronger than before. The floor shook slightly as the system came alive. Gasps and shouts filled the air. Cameras flashed wildly. Michael stood, dusted his hands, and said simply, "It works now." The engineers stared at him, speechless. Sarah, Robert's assistant, whispered, "How did he know?" Robert did not answer. He could not. His laughter had died, and in its place was silence. The guests, once ready to mock, now clapped and cheered. Some stood on their feet. Reporters shouted questions. "Who is he? How did he fix it? What happened just now?" But Michael only picked up his broom again. He did not bow, did not wait for praise. He turned and walked slowly back toward the edge of the hall, where he had been before. Behind him, the billionaire watched, his arms still folded but his heart strangely heavy. For the first time in a long time, Robert was not thinking about wealth or power. He was thinking about the quiet man who had asked for 1 minute and given him back his future. And in that silence, Robert realized his laughter had been the sound of pride, but what he had witnessed just now was the sound of truth. The machine's steady hum filled the great hall. Its bright lights reflected on the polished floor like stars trapped inside steel. People still clapped, though some were too stunned to move. What had just happened did not feel real. The great invention, silent and lifeless for days, now glowed with power, and the man who had fixed it was not an engineer, not a scientist, not even part of the team. He was the janitor with a broom. Michael walked back to the corner quietly. He carried himself like nothing extraordinary had happened. His broom was in his hand again, as if he belonged only with dust and silence, not machines and miracles. But the guests could not ignore him anymore. Reporters whispered to each other, their cameras flashing, desperate to capture the man before he disappeared into the crowd. One of them muttered, "This will be tomorrow's headline." On stage, Robert's chest rose and fell as he tried to steady himself. His smile had vanished, and in its place was a strange look, half confusion, half respect, and maybe a trace of fear. For years he had been the man everyone admired, the man who solved problems, who created futures. Yet in less than 1 minute, someone he had never noticed had done what his team of experts could not. Sarah, his assistant, leaned close. "Do you want me to bring him up here?" she whispered. Robert shook his head slowly. "No, let him be." But his eyes never left Michael. While the audience stared at the glowing machine, Michael's thoughts drifted far away. He did not want applause. He had once lived in rooms like this, with shining machines and bright screens. Years ago, before life had taken a sharp turn, he had been the man on the stage, the one explaining, the one fixing. But mistakes, losses, and doors closing one after another had pushed him out. When he had fallen, nobody had offered a hand, so he had picked up a broom. It was quiet work. Safe work. A man with a broom was invisible, and sometimes invisibility was easier than pity. Still, his hands had not forgotten. Machines were like puzzles to him. He could look at one and feel its rhythm, hear its voice. This one had been calling to him for days, begging someone to listen. And so when silence had filled the hall, he had stepped forward. 1 minute. That was all it took. The guests returned their attention to Robert. "Incredible," one shouted. "What a launch." "Yes, amazing work, Robert," another called. Robert forced a smile, but his voice lacked its usual strength when he said, "Yes. Yes, it is working now." Inside, though, his pride felt shaken. It was not his team who had saved him, not his years of planning, but a man he had never valued. That truth pressed against him like a weight he could not lift. The engineers, embarrassed, whispered among themselves. Some avoided looking at Michael, their pride bruised. Others stared at him with a strange mix of admiration and envy. Robert raised his hand to calm the room. "Thank you for being here today," he said. "You have witnessed history." The crowd clapped again, louder this time. But as they cheered, Robert's gaze followed Michael, who stood quietly in the corner. When the hall emptied hours later, the silver machine still glowed faintly, humming like a giant heart. The guests had left, their voices carried out into the night. The engineers gathered their papers, avoiding Robert's eyes. Only Michael remained, sweeping slowly near the far wall. Robert walked toward him. His expensive shoes clicked against the floor. For once, he did not look like a man above others. He looked like a man searching for answers. "You fixed it," Robert said. His voice was quieter than usual. Michael did not stop sweeping. "Yes, how?" Robert asked. Michael paused, leaning on his broom. He did not look at Robert, only at the machine glowing in the distance. It was simple. Sometimes the small things matter more than the big ones. Robert frowned. "But my team, they are the best in the world." They could not see it. Michael finally looked at him. His eyes were calm but deep, as if they carried years of stories. Sometimes the best look too hard. They search for storms and miss the quiet wind. Robert said nothing for a long moment. He felt the truth in Michael's words, though he did not want to admit it. "Who are you?" Robert finally asked. Michael smiled faintly. "I'm the janitor." He turned back to his broom. Robert's jaw tightened. He wanted to push, to demand more, but something inside stopped him. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was respect. Or maybe it was the strange feeling that this man had chosen to remain hidden for a reason. Later that night, in the empty parking lot, Michael walked slowly to the bus stop. The streetlights cast long shadows. He carried no bag, only his broom and his silence. Robert's car, black and polished, rolled up beside him. The window slid down. Robert looked at him from the driver's seat. "You could have embarrassed me today," Robert said. "You could have taken the stage, taken the credit." Michael shook his head. "I wasn't here for credit. I was here for work. Why help me then?" Robert asked. Michael looked up at the dark sky, then back at Robert. "Because it needed to work. That's all." Robert studied him, the way he had studied contracts and business deals. But Michael's face revealed nothing except quiet strength. Finally, Robert nodded. "Get in, I'll give you a ride." Michael hesitated, then shook his head. "Thank you, but I'll take the bus." The billionaire blinked, unused to refusal. But Michael's decision was firm, so Robert only nodded again and drove away. As the bus arrived, Michael stepped inside, choosing a seat by the window. The city lights passed by, glowing against the night. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt the strange weight of being noticed again. But tomorrow, he told himself, he would pick up the broom as always. Because sometimes the safest way to live was to stay in the background, yet deep inside, a voice whispered, "1 minute can change everything." And though he tried to silence it, the truth remained. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows of Robert's office. The city stretched far below, towers and cars moving like pieces on a giant board. The hum of the machine still echoed in Robert's mind from the night before. He sat at his desk, his fingers tapping lightly on the surface. He should have been proud. The launch had worked. The machine was alive. Headlines across the country praised the event. Newspapers called it a breakthrough in energy and Robert's greatest triumph. Reporters wrote about the promise of a cleaner future, about billions in investment, about history being made. Yet Robert did not feel proud. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the janitor. Michael's calm voice still rang in his ears. "Give me 1 minute. I can fix that." It was not the engineers who had saved the launch. Not the planners, not the money, not his power. It was the quiet man with a broom. Robert leaned back in his chair. For the first time in many years, he felt something he could not name. It was not anger, not fear. It was humility, sharp and heavy. Meanwhile, Michael moved through the hall with his broom as usual. He swept the same floors, polished the same windows. To him, the day was no different from any other. But to everyone else, it was not the same. The engineers passed him with lowered eyes, remembering how he had solved the problem they could not. Some whispered quietly when he was near. Others simply walked faster, unwilling to face him. The security guards nodded to him now, their eyes carrying a trace of respect. Even Sarah, Robert's trusted assistant, stopped to ask if he wanted coffee. Michael only smiled politely and said, "No, thank you." Inside, though, he wished they would stop looking at him. For years, he had lived in silence. It was safer there, hidden in the corners where nobody asked questions. Now, suddenly, eyes followed him everywhere. Later that afternoon, Robert called Sarah into his office. She carried a stack of papers, but he waved them away. "Forget the reports," Robert said. "Tell me about him." Sarah frowned. "About who?" "The janitor," Robert replied. His voice was firm, but there was curiosity behind it. Sarah hesitated. "His name is Michael. He's been working here for about a year. Quiet man. Comes early, leaves late, never causes trouble. That's all I know." Robert tapped his fingers again. "Check his background." Sarah raised her eyebrows. "Why?" Robert leaned forward. "Because I don't believe a janitor can fix what experts cannot." "I want to know who he really is." Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." That evening, Robert walked through the empty hall where the machine stood. Its steady hum filled the silence. He circled it slowly, touching the smooth steel with his hand. He thought of the millions of dollars he had poured into it, the sleepless nights, the endless planning. And yet, in the end, the machine had not answered to him. It had answered to Michael. Robert sat down on one of the chairs, his face lit by the glow of the machine. For the first time in his life, he asked himself a question he had never considered. What if wealth and power are not enough? What if there are people greater than me living in silence, unseen? The thought unsettled him. Michael, meanwhile, walked home after work. His apartment was small, walls lined with books and old notebooks. On a wooden table in the corner lay sketches of machines he had once dreamed of building. Dust covered some of them, but the lines were sharp, alive with ideas. He sat at the table, staring at the papers. His fingers touched one drawing gently, a design he had made years ago. It had never been built. His heart ached as memories came back. He had once stood at the center of meetings, his voice loud with passion. He had once worn suits, not uniforms. But when failures piled up and doors closed, people had stopped listening. And when tragedy struck his family, the world had felt too heavy to fight anymore. So he had stepped away. Yet yesterday, for one short minute, he had returned. The next day, Robert arrived early at the building. He stood near the machine, waiting. When Michael entered with his broom, Robert walked toward him. "Good morning." Michael looked surprised but nodded. "Good morning, sir." Robert studied him for a moment. "Why didn't you tell anyone you knew about machines?" Michael leaned on his broom. His answer was simple. Nobody asked. Robert almost laughed, but the truth of the words stopped him. He shook his head slowly. "You are not just a janitor." Michael smiled faintly. "But I am. That is the job I was given. And I do it." Robert felt frustration rise in him. "Do you realize what you did? You saved everything. Without you, last night would have been a disaster." Michael shrugged. "Sometimes 1 minute can change everything. That's all." Robert stared at him, searching his face for arrogance or pride, but found none. Michael's eyes were calm, steady, carrying both strength and sadness. For the first time, Robert did not know what to say. That evening, Sarah returned with a folder. She placed it on Robert's desk. "I found his records," she said softly. Robert opened it. Inside were pages of history. Michael had once been an engineer. His name appeared on patents, research papers, and old projects. He had worked in some of the best labs in the country. But then years ago, his trail went dark. No more inventions, no more projects, just silence. Robert's hand rested on the papers. His chest grew heavy. This was no ordinary janitor. This was a man who had once stood among the brightest, who had carried dreams, who had fallen and disappeared into the shadows. Robert closed the folder. "He chose silence," he whispered. Sarah nodded. "Yes, and maybe he prefers it that way." Robert looked out the window at the glowing city. Or maybe he's waiting for someone to listen. The office grew quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the machine below, steady and alive. And in that silence, Robert realized something. Respect was not earned through wealth or power alone. Sometimes it was found in the quiet strength of a man who asked for only 1 minute and gave back a future. The evening air was cool, carrying the quiet sound of traffic outside the tall building. Inside, the hall stood empty, except for the silver machine humming softly in the center. Its steady glow lit up the polished floor like a calm fire. Robert stood near the machine, his hands resting in his pockets. His thoughts were heavy, circling again and again around one name, Michael. He had read the folder Sarah gave him, but the papers told only half a story. The other half was written in Michael's eyes in the silence he carried. When the door opened, Robert looked up. Michael entered with his broom as he always did, his steps calm, his face steady. "Michael," Robert said. His voice echoed softly in the wide hall. Michael glanced at him and gave a small nod. "Good evening, sir." Robert walked closer. "I want to know who you really are." Michael leaned on his broom. His expression did not change. "I told you. I'm the janitor." Robert shook his head. "No, that's the job you do now, but that's not who you are. I've seen your record. You were once an engineer. You designed things, built things, important things. Why are you here, sweeping floors?" For a moment, Michael said nothing. His eyes drifted toward the machine, its lights reflecting in his gaze. Then slowly he spoke. "Years ago," Michael began, "I was exactly where you are now, in meetings, in conferences, on stages. I built machines with my team. Some failed, some worked. I believed I was building a future." Robert listened carefully, his arms crossed. Michael's voice was steady, but beneath it was something heavier, something unspoken. "I worked day and night," Michael continued, "but life doesn't stop for ambition. My wife grew sick. My son needed me, but I was too busy chasing success to see how much I was losing at home." His words grew softer. "By the time I looked up, it was too late. I lost them both." Robert's chest tightened. He did not know what to say, so he said nothing. Michael's eyes lowered. "After that, I tried to keep working, but the spark was gone. Every machine I touched felt empty. People looked at me differently, like I was broken. So I stepped away. I put down the tools, the blueprints. I chose silence. And I took this job because it was quiet, because nobody expected me to be more than a man with a broom." The hall fell silent, the only sound the steady hum of the great machine. Robert finally spoke. "But your mind, your gift, it's still there. Yesterday proved that. You can't hide it." Michael gave a faint smile. "Some gifts feel like curses when they remind you of what you've lost." Robert's throat tightened. He had spent years building his empire, but he had never stopped to think about what it had cost him, or what it could cost others. For a while, neither man spoke. Robert walked slowly around the machine, his footsteps echoing. He thought about the headlines calling him a genius, while the true genius stood in silence with a broom. "You saved me," Robert said at last. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You saved this project. Without you, everything would have collapsed. The world would have laughed at me." Michael shook his head. "I didn't save you. I saved the machine. That's all." But Robert did not agree. He knew the truth. Michael had done far more than that. Later, in Robert's office, the city light stretched endlessly beyond the glass. He poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to Michael. The janitor accepted politely but did not drink. "Tell me," Robert said, "what do you see when you look at that machine?" Michael thought for a moment. "I see potential. A future where people live better lives, but I also see danger. If the wrong people control it, it becomes another tool of power, not hope." Robert nodded slowly. "You think I'm the wrong person?" Michael did not answer immediately. He looked Robert in the eye. "I think power makes it hard to listen. Yesterday you laughed at me. If the machine hadn't failed, you never would have heard me at all." The words hit Robert harder than any headline ever could. He set down his glass and leaned back, his mind heavy with the truth. The next day, Sarah noticed something different. Robert was quieter, less sharp. He asked fewer questions about profits and more about people. When she asked what was wrong, he only said, "I met a man who reminded me that silence can be louder than speeches." Sarah frowned but said nothing. That evening, Robert returned to the hall. Michael was there again, sweeping in his usual rhythm. "I want you on my team," Robert said firmly. Michael did not stop sweeping. "I told you I'm done with teams, with projects. I live quietly now." Robert stepped closer. "The world needs men like you." "I need men like you." Michael's eyes softened, but his answer was the same. "The world doesn't need me. It needs hope. And hope doesn't always come from men like me. Sometimes it comes from people like you if you choose to listen." Robert stood there, his heart heavy. He had built his empire on the belief that money and brilliance could solve anything. But in front of him stood a man who had once held both and still walked away. For the first time, Robert wondered if his own empire stood on weak ground. That night, alone in his apartment, Michael sat at his table with his old notebooks. His fingers traced the faded lines of his forgotten designs. The memory of his wife's smile, his son's laugh, flickered in his mind. He closed the notebook gently. The broom leaned against the wall beside him. The machine he had fixed was miles away, glowing brightly in the city's heart. But here, in his quiet room, Michael found peace in the silence. Still, a thought would not leave him. 1 minute can change everything, and though he told himself he wanted only peace, a small spark inside whispered that maybe his time in silence was not yet over. The following morning, Robert arrived early at the hall again. The great machine still hummed softly, its light steady and calm as if it had grown used to the rhythm of Michael's presence. Robert's mind was alive with thoughts, more alive than it had been in years. For the first time, he realized that admiration and respect were not always about status, money, or power. Sometimes they came from quiet strength, from patience, from a mind willing to see what others ignored. Sarah was already there, setting up documents and checking schedules. She noticed Robert's serious expression. "Sir," she said, "are you okay?" Robert did not answer immediately. His eyes scanned the hall. Finally, he said, "Michael deserves recognition. He saved the project. And I want people to know it." Sarah blinked. "You mean, you want him to come to the stage?" Robert shook his head. "No, not yet. I want him to be recognized in the right way. Respect isn't given by applause alone." Michael arrived carrying his broom as usual. He moved slowly, his eyes calm. He noticed Robert approaching and stopped sweeping. "Michael," Robert said, "I want to talk to you." Michael nodded politely. "Of course, sir." Robert led him near the machine. "Yesterday you reminded me that talent, knowledge, and courage are not measured by titles or wealth. You've taught me something important. I want others to understand it too." Michael's eyes softened. "Sir, I don't need recognition. I only fixed what needed fixing." Robert smiled faintly. "And that is why it matters." Later that day, a team of reporters arrived at the hall. They expected to see Robert alone, the billionaire genius behind the machine. But Robert had a different plan. He stood on the stage, the machine glowing behind him, and spoke to the gathered journalists. "Yesterday," he began, "this machine would not have worked without the efforts of someone often overlooked. His contributions saved our launch and our project. That man is Michael, our janitor." Gasps filled the hall. The cameras clicked. Reporters whispered among themselves. Michael, standing quietly at the edge of the stage with his broom, did not move. He did not look proud or flustered. He only nodded once, acknowledging the words. Robert continued, "Michael's skill, patience, and observation remind us that respect is earned through action, not position. We often forget to see those who work quietly unseen. Yesterday, Michael reminded me, and all of us, what true strength looks like." The room grew silent for a moment. Then applause began, soft at first, then louder, as if the audience realized the truth of Robert's words. Michael's cheeks were calm, but inside, a quiet warmth spread. He had never sought attention. He had never desired fame. Yet now his actions were finally acknowledged, not by force, not by money, but by the simple honesty of truth. After the press left, the engineers gathered around Michael. Some hesitated at first, unsure if they could approach him after yesterday's events. But one of them, a young woman named Emily, spoke. "Michael," she said softly, I want to thank you. I should have seen it. I should have noticed. You saved us all yesterday." Michael smiled faintly. "You did what you could. Sometimes it takes someone from the outside to see the inside." Another engineer, John, shook his head. "I've spent years learning machines, but I missed what was right in front of me." "I respect you, Michael." Even the head engineer, a man usually proud and rigid, stepped forward. "I underestimated you. Today I understand that talent comes in many forms. Thank you." Michael nodded politely, but he returned quickly to his broom, sweeping quietly as he always had. Robert watched silently from the stage. He saw the respect Michael earned, not through wealth, not through influence, not through titles, but through simple courage, knowledge, and humility. It was a lesson he would never forget. He called Sarah to his side. "See that?" he asked. "The world notices true talent when it speaks quietly. Yesterday I laughed, and today I am learning." Sarah smiled. "Yes, sir." "He's extraordinary," Robert nodded. "And he is exactly what this project needed. More than money, more than plans. He is what humanity needs in moments like these." That afternoon, Michael returned to his routine. He cleaned the floors, polished the metal panels, and checked the smaller machines around the hall. but his mind was alive with new possibilities. For years he had hidden in silence, believing that the world had no place for someone like him. Now he realized that even small acts, done with honesty, with care, with focus, could ripple outward and touch many lives. As he swept, he noticed Robert nearby, watching him quietly. The billionaire did not speak, did not interfere. He only observed, silently showing respect. That quiet acknowledgement mattered more to Michael than applause or headlines. By evening, word had spread beyond the hall. Journalists and online media praised Robert's acknowledgement of Michael. Social media buzzed with images of the humble janitor standing beside the glowing machine. Comments praised his intelligence, his humility, and his patience. Yet Michael did not chase recognition. He did not seek fame. He only allowed the truth to be known. And in that truth he found something he had long forgotten: purpose. For the first time in years, Michael felt that he had a place in the world, not because of wealth, not because of power, but because he had acted when it mattered most. Later that night, Robert returned to the hall alone. The city light stretched endlessly through the glass. He walked past the glowing machine, stopping to look at it carefully. He remembered the laughter he had felt when Michael first spoke. And now he remembered the silence that followed, the silence filled with wisdom, skill, and quiet courage. Robert realized that respect, true respect, could not be bought or commanded. It had to be earned. And yesterday, in one single minute, Michael had earned it all. He turned and walked toward the exit, a feeling of humility resting in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he felt that he had not only built a machine, but had also witnessed something far greater: the human spirit, quiet and strong. And somewhere at the edge of the hall, Michael continued sweeping, calm and steady, carrying with him the knowledge that one person's courage, 1 minute of action, could change everything. The hall was quiet again, bathed in the gentle glow of the machine. The hum was steady like a heartbeat, calm and reassuring. Outside, the city moved with its usual rhythm, unaware that inside a story had unfolded that would quietly change the lives of 2 men forever. Michael stood at the edge of the hall, broom in hand. He had returned to his routine, as always, moving carefully along the polished floors. Yet this time, the act of sweeping felt different. It was no longer simply a job. It was a reminder of how small actions, done with care, could have profound effects. Robert entered silently, his footsteps echoing lightly. He stopped near Michael, studying him quietly. There was a new weight in Robert's eyes, a mix of respect, gratitude, and a rare humility that few had ever seen in him. "Michael," Robert said softly, "I've been thinking." Michael glanced up, his expression calm. "Yes, sir?" Robert took a deep breath. "I've realized that success is not only about inventions or money. It's about people, those who act when it matters most, even if no one notices. Yesterday you reminded me of that. You reminded me of what really matters." Michael's eyes softened. "I only did what I could, sir. That is all." Robert shook his head. "No, you did more than that. You saved a project, a dream, and maybe even reminded me who I am." For a moment, silence filled the hall. The machine's hum was the only sound. Then Robert continued, "I want you to join me, not for headlines, not for glory, but because your skills, your insight, and your patience are needed. You can help shape this project and perhaps many more in ways that no one else can." Michael's hands tightened slightly on the broom, but he did not speak immediately. The offer was tempting. He had spent years hiding, retreating from the world, avoiding recognition. Yet Robert's words carried no pressure, no arrogance. They carried trust. "I will consider it," Michael said finally, "but I will not change who I am. I work quietly, I act when needed, and I do not seek fame." Robert nodded. "I understand. That is exactly why I respect you." The next morning, the hall was alive with activity. Engineers worked around the machine, checking systems, making small adjustments, and preparing for the next demonstration. Michael moved among them, observing quietly, offering small suggestions when necessary. For the first time in years, he felt included, not for a title, not for a paycheck, but because his mind and his judgment were valued, and yet he remained himself, humble, patient, and attentive. Sarah approached him quietly. "Michael, people are noticing you now. Not just Robert, not just the engineers. Reporters, social media, they all know what you did. How do you feel?" Michael smiled faintly. I feel calm. That is enough for me. Recognition is not my goal. Seeing the project succeed, that is enough. Sarah nodded, understanding. Some people sought fame, some sought wealth. Michael sought purpose, and purpose had finally returned to him. Meanwhile, Robert watched from the side. He observed the respect Michael was earning, not just through words, but through action. Engineers paused to listen. Staff asked questions. Even the security guards treated him differently. With a quiet deference, Robert realized that one man's courage, his willingness to act when the moment mattered, could inspire more than any speech, any headline, any award. Michael's humility and skill had created a ripple that touched everyone in the building. It reminded Robert of his own journey, of his own mistakes, and of the value of listening. For the first time in years, he felt that he was learning as much as he was teaching. Days turned into weeks, and the project grew stronger. Michael continued his quiet work, observing, adjusting, and guiding when necessary. The machine evolved under his careful attention. Minor issues were corrected before they became problems. His knowledge, once hidden, now shaped the future quietly, efficiently, and effectively. One afternoon, Emily, one of the engineers, approached Michael. "I've learned so much from watching you," she said softly. "I didn't think a janitor could teach me so much about machines." About patience and observation, Michael smiled faintly. "It is not the job that teaches. It is the work itself. Watch closely, listen carefully, and act when the moment calls for it. That is enough." John, another engineer, added, "You've changed the way we all work. We think too fast, we miss details. You remind us to pause to see what others overlook." Michael nodded, quietly pleased. He did not seek praise, yet the quiet recognition filled a part of him long dormant. One evening after the hall was empty, Michael stood near the glowing machine. Robert approached, his steps slow. "You've done more than fix a machine," Robert said softly. "You've taught me and everyone here lessons we couldn't have learned otherwise. About patience, humility, and the power of quiet action." Michael looked at him, eyes calm. "I only acted when it mattered. Anyone could have done the same. But not everyone would have," Robert smiled. "And that is why you are exceptional." Michael shook his head slightly. "I am not exceptional. I am just aware. And I act when I see the need." Robert nodded. He understood. True greatness was not always loud or visible. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and unseen, like Michael. Months passed. The project succeeded beyond expectations. The machine became a symbol of innovation, efficiency, and care. And Michael, still humble, still quiet, remained its steady guardian, ensuring that every system worked perfectly. Reporters occasionally asked for interviews. Engineers sought guidance, and even Robert found himself learning from the man he had once laughed at. Yet Michael's life remained simple. His broom still rested against the wall, a reminder of where he had been and how far he had come. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Michael stood by the machine, watching the lights reflect on the polished floor. He thought of the journey he had taken, from loss, silence, and hiding to this place of quiet purpose. Robert joined him silently, not speaking, just observing. No words were necessary. The machine hummed, the lights glowed, and the two men shared a moment of understanding. That courage, humility, and skill, even in one quiet person, could change the world. Michael finally said softly, 1 minute. That was all it took, Robert smiled. Yes, 1 minute, one action, one life changed forever. And in the stillness of the hall, with the city glowing outside, both men knew the truth. Sometimes, it only takes a single minute of courage, a single act of care, to change everything. Michael picked up his broom again, sweeping quietly. But this time, the act felt like a celebration. Not of work, not of recognition, but of life, of purpose, and of the quiet power one person could hold.